How are you going to pay for your kids' college? With the education costs rising crazy, putting it in a piggy bank is not going to work. From piggy banks to college graduation caps, we are plotting the course for college with smart accounts for smarter kids. Hello and welcome to SWBC's Uncharted Wealth Podcast, where we take the financial complex topics and break them down into easy to understand terms so you can navigate your journey with confidence. I'm Mike Walters. I'm a CFP and a wealth advisor here at SWBC. And today we're going to talk about funding your kids or grandkids' college education expenses, okay? Education costs are on the rise, and with so many options out there, how do you know which one is going to be the best for your plan? So without further ado, let's jump into the different options out there available. All right, so the first option out there, and probably the most popular option, is the 529 savings plan. And now technically there are two different versions of the 529, with one being an actual savings to a particular college institution. The other version is where you're actually setting up a cash type investment account that can be applied towards different education institutions, right? These are tax advantage savings accounts to where you put money in, it grows tax deferred, and when you take distributions out to pay for college, as long as those expenses are qualified expenses, it comes out completely tax-free from the account. Now, these are state-sponsored, which means you can get a Texas 529 plan or a New York 529 plan, et cetera, but that does not mean that if you got a Texas 529 plan that you could only go to colleges in Texas. It's just the state that sponsors that specific plan. So for another example, I've set up a 529 plan for my daughter with a New York State 529 plan with no intentions of her going to college in New York. Well, maybe that's her decision, not mine, but she can go to college anywhere she wants. It doesn't have to be in New York. So something to think about. Some states, especially if they have state income taxes, will offer some tax deductions for contributing to these 529 plans. However, since we're in Texas and we don't have a state income tax, we're not going to get any deductions for contributing to 529 plans, but again, we don't have to pay a state income tax, so it is what it is. These 529 plans can be used for qualifying tuition from grades kindergarten up through college, okay? So kindergarten through 12th grade, your normative school, and any higher learning education as well. If you're using it for K through 12, you can only use $10,000 a year from that 529 plan to cover those expenses, right? So there are limitations to that. Now, there are some recent updates in the tax legislation for these 529 plans that will allow, under certain conditions, that you can roll over leftover money in a 529 plan over to a Roth IRA. There's a lot of clients out there that have spent, quite a bit of money funding their kids' 529 plans. Maybe they didn't go to college, or maybe their college was fully funded with scholarships or so on and so forth. There's options other than, leaving it in the account and maybe holding it for a potential grandkid or so on and so forth. This new update will allow you to potentially roll these funds into a Roth IRA to start their retirement savings. So that's pretty cool as well. The next option out there is called a Coverdell Education Savings Account, or ESA for short. Coverdell ESA. Same kind of tax benefits as a 529. When you contribute to this plan, it grows completely tax deferred, and then any withdrawals that come out for qualified tuition will come out tax free. The main difference for the Coverdell ESAs, though, is that there is a limit to how much you can put in a Coverdell versus some of the other options, right? 529 plans don't have any technical limits that you can put into a 529. Bonus disclaimer here, if you do more than the annual gift tax exemption amount, then you might owe a gift tax. But Again, there's no limitations on how much you can actually put into the 529. The Coverdell, though, is limited to $2,000 a year that can go into this account, and there are income limitations depending on if you're actually eligible to contribute to this account or not. Now, this can also be used for K through 12 tuition as well, including the higher education for like college and post-grad degrees. The biggest difference I see, though, with the Coverdell ESAs is most of the time they give you more flexibility when it comes to your investment options, okay? Most 529s will only allow you to pick mutual funds, okay? So if you don't know what mutual funds are, we'll talk about that in a different session. But you're only limited to mutual funds. So if you want to do more, advanced investing or actually doing physical, individual stock, bonds, ETFs, such like that, a Coverdell is where you're going to want to go. But just remember, there's those limitations to how much you can contribute to the account. Well, what if you want to start saving for your child's future, but it doesn't necessarily mean higher education, right? A lot of folks don't actually go to college, but they still have very successful careers and lives and so on and so forth. But if you want to save but not be restrained to that money only being dedicated towards education or higher education tuition, there are some other ways to do that. The main way to do it is with a UGMA or a UTMA, Uniform Transfer to Minors Act. It's an account, but they named it after the act that was made that was very clever, or the Uniform Gift to Minors Act, if you really want to know what it means. These are custodial accounts. What that means is, let's say I opened up a UTMA account for my daughter. Okay, she is under the age of 18. She cannot legally own an account in her name, but a custodian has to be assigned to be the, what's a synonym for custodian? Just the manager of that account. Okay, so the account would be opened up for my daughter. She would technically be the owner of it, but I would be the custodian of it, and I would be in charge of managing this account until she becomes the age of majority, which in Texas is 21. Different states have different age of majority, but basically when the child becomes the age of majority, they can take over the account fully, right? So investing in these accounts are similar to the 529 and education savings account is you can save for their benefit in the future. The only difference is there's no real tax benefits to the UGMA and UTMA accounts. Therefore, the main benefit of doing the education ones was that it would come out tax-free if you use it for qualified tuition expenses. These, though, there are no parameters like that, so there's really no tax benefits, but you have the open flexibility of being able to use that money on most whatever you want as long as it's in for the benefit of the child. Now, there are some specific limitations, like you can't say the money's coming out to pay for their food or their clothing because that's what you're supposed to be spending anyways. But so this is more looking as if you want to help them pay for their first car, or maybe you want to use it for education or help them, put a down payment on their home, something like that. You can do it this way, or if you want to just use it as a graduation gift or something like that. That's how these accounts can be beneficial. Again, there's no limitations to how much you can put in these accounts. There's no limitations to how much you can take. Again, as long as it's for the benefit of the child. And for some honorable mentions that maybe aren't as used as wildly as some of these other ones, there's something called Series EE and Series I bonds. Now, these are not used as commonly as some of the other accounts we talked about. It's basically buying a CD type investment that you're purchasing it directly from the government, and it gives you that tax benefit of, hey, you can defer any taxes once as long as it grows, and then when you pull the money out or when it matures, that money goes towards these qualified tuition expenses completely tax-free. Okay, that's another option. And then the last option is not necessarily, well, let's just say it's another option. The Roth IRA. It's a retirement account. We all know that by this point. But there are certain stipulations with the Roth IRAs that you can pull out your contribution amounts, your cost basis at any time, completely tax-free. Bet you didn't know that. So if you put $100,000 into a Roth IRA over, let's just say, a 15-year, 20-year time frame, and it grows to $1 million, and you only put in $100,000, you can pull out that $100,000 at any time tax-free. So what does that mean for our parents and grandparents that have these Roth IRAs out there? They can be taking out distributions from their retirement accounts, these Roth IRAs, and using it to potentially help their kids and grandkids pay for college, tax-free. There are some other stipulations where you can actually tap some of the earnings in the Roth IRA for education, but there's some limitations to those withdrawals. So, but those are the two different ways that you can tap a Roth IRA for education expenses. And now we are rolling into the Uncharted territory section of today's podcast. What you may not be thinking about is how any of these accounts might potentially affect your child or your grandchild's eligibility for student aid, okay? And what am I kind of talking about here? I'm talking about the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. If your child is not going to be getting a full ride with scholarships or grants, anything like that, they're going to have to apply for student aid, just like I did, just like a lot of people I know did. But these accounts that we were talking about earlier, some of them play a bigger part in determining eligibility than others, and you're going to see me look down at my cards a little bit more because this part's a little bit more complicated than normal, but the idea here is to make sure that you are aware of how this is going to affect eligibility when it comes down to applying for aid. Now, the 529 plans, when they're owned by the parent of the beneficiary, they are counted as the parent's assets. And then they're only assessed up to 5.64% of the value. What does that mean? Okay, so that means if you have $100,000 you've saved up for your child in a 529 plan, only $5,640 of that is going to be assessed as an asset in determining their financial aid, which is a good thing. This has a relatively low impact on the child's eligibility. Withdrawals for qualified expenses, again, they do not count as income, but timing is very important, right? What that means is if you pay your spring 2026 tuition in December 2025, the 529 withdrawal should also come out in 2025. Withdrawals must be matched to the expenses in the same calendar year. If you do it in different years, you're going to disqualify those expenses coming out, and there might be subject to taxes. So it's very important to match up the timing for that. Now, 529s that are owned by the beneficiary's grandparent. Now, distributions used to be counted as untaxed income to the student, which was not a good thing. It would reduce their eligibility for aid. But starting with the 2024-2025 FAFSA, it's no longer reported as income. So grandparents, save a way for your grandkids to go to college. Now the custodial accounts, the UGMA and UTMA. Now you set these up not necessarily wanting these or intending these to be solely used for education, but if you find yourself setting one up for your kid or your grandkid and they are going to apply for student aid at some point, these accounts will affect their eligibility a lot more than the 529 plans and the Coverdales, okay? It's because these are counted as the assets of the student and up to 20% of the value. So if we're looking at a $100,000 UTMA account, $20,000 of that each year is going to be counted towards the student's eligibility, meaning they have $20,000 of money that they can be using towards student aid. So it has a lot higher impact on whether they're going to get aid for that year or not. Withdrawals might be treated as income as well, which can significantly reduce eligibility. So again, there's a lot more flexibility with these custodial accounts and what the money is used for. But if it is ultimately used for education, it will be a little bit more restrictive if that child is going to be applying for federal aid. Last but not least, the Roth IRA accounts are not counted as assets at all in determining eligibility, which is great. But even though the withdrawals of basis are not counted as income, withdrawals of earnings will count as income on the FAFSA in the following year. So if, let's say, for example, I pulled money out of my Roth IRA to pay for my daughter's college this year, that amount that I pulled out is going to count as income in next year's filing for the FAFSA. So some things to remember here. So the key insight here is saving smart isn't just about growing money. It's also about preserving access to the aid that is going to be potentially available to your kid as well if they plan on getting student loans or grants or such like that. Now here's your pro tip on navigating the uncharted territories of student aid eligibility. Okay? You want to withdraw from any 529 plans first, especially ones that are owned by the parents, to minimize how they are going to be impacted on the FAFSA. You need to time those withdrawals to match the calendar year of the expense, so that way it's not counting towards a different year. And then also be careful with any Roth IRA withdrawals, because again, that will count as income in the following year that you apply for the FAFSA and potentially reduce aid. All right, so for the tips to take away today is I want to encourage everybody to review their current saving strategy. If you are putting aside money for your child or your grandchildren or whomever, just review it and see if that's the best way that you can be doing it. Second is maybe talk with a financial advisor. See if there are some options out there that might be more applicable to your situation and maybe help you a little bit even with taxes as you save. And last, start early. Even the small contributions are going to add up. Even if you don't know if you want it to go towards an education-oriented account or not, you can still put something away to just get those savings going. Now, I want to thank everybody for being here today on the 12th episode of the Uncharted Wealth Podcast. As a reminder, everything that I talk about here is not to be taken as tax, legal, or financial advice. I'd recommend that you meet with an advisor on any of those topics if you want more information. Any of the opinions that are shared here are mine, not SWBC's. And so with that said, I'd like for you to like this post, comment, subscribe, share it with your grandma, your auntie, or whoever you're saving for education for. Don't be a silly goose and stay smart out there with your savings. Later. Vote for me. Well, by that time, it's a little too late to start saving. You know what I mean?
Investing involves certain risks, including possible loss of principal. You should understand and carefully consider a strategy's objectives, risks, fees, and expenses, and other information before investing. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change and are not intended to be a recommendation or investment advice. Such views do not take into account the individual financial circumstances or objectives of any other investor that receives them. This information should not be considered a solicitation nor a recommendation of an offer to provide any service in any jurisdiction where it would be unlawful to do so under the laws of that jurisdiction. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Please consult with your individual tax professionals and/or attorney for additional information.